Bradley Birkenfeld, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here in Paris on a beautiful day, a bit chilly though, with the Arc de Triomphe in the back. We meet you in Paris as you were giving a speech on whistleblowing and what you've done about UBS and to end also the Swiss banking secrecy, and to promote your book as well, which is in French, in German, in English of course, also Italian, Greek, Japanese. How much of a bestseller is the book actually?
Well, I think everyone will judge a book by the sales, of course, but being in 8 different languages, I've gotten great reviews. I've lectured around the world, and I don't know the actual numbers of books sold, but it's been very well received around the world.
Was it difficult to find, especially in France, to find a publisher?
It's always difficult to find a publisher on a very controversial subject, especially in the banking sector. But we ultimately found a great publisher here and got the book out right before the UBS trial, actually.
Okay, you mentioned the UBS trial. So we're in Paris also to talk about what happened at the tax fraud trial against UBS. The verdict is expected in February. The bank, which denies any wrongdoing, risks more than 5 billion Swiss francs. I was wondering, listening to you, reading what also the interviews you gave, after all these years, you started this back in 2007 and 8, then you went to prison, went out. I was thinking you could move away from this, you could do something else, but you're still very mad at the bank, mad at the US Department of Justice. What makes you tick today?
Well, I would say that this story is so controversial because Swiss bank secrecy was ingrained in the Constitution in Switzerland. And I respected that. In Switzerland, where I resided and where I worked, I did the right thing. I followed the law, but I challenged the law when we had to travel outside of Switzerland. And I think that's the real sticking point, and most people recognize that. So what I did was I challenged the system, and as a director of the bank, that was the proper thing to do. I went to my legal and compliance departments to try and rectify the situation. Unfortunately, they covered it up. So what I do now after all of these events was to try and change the system. Not just what UBS was doing, but the other Swiss banks. And it's important to understand that as a foreigner coming into the country.
What motivates you? Why are you keeping doing this? You got a lot of money. You could have a quiet life now, but no, you're not retiring.
Well, no, I'm not. And I think it's important because the case is so historic and unprecedented that if you don't take this subject matter and bring it to the people so people understand exactly what we're talking about, they'll never really understand the true story behind it, because the story wasn't told from UBS's perspective or the Department of Justice's perspective. They lied. I told the story, and that's why I wrote the book, to tell the truth.
Back in Paris, we followed the trial. Some people went to testify, you did not. And one of your former boss, number 3 at UBS at that time, Raoul Weil, and he had strong words about the whistleblowers. And regarding you, he said, "You're a liar, but not a thief." And I was a bit puzzled by that quote from him. Maybe it was kind of also a compliment to you, that in a way you deserve the bonuses or the money you made at the bank when you were working with him.
Well, I don't know what he means by a liar. I never lied, and I think the Department of Justice even put it in writing saying I never lied. So I think he's a bit delusional, Raoul Weil. He was in charge of this illegal operation on a global basis. So for him to call me a liar is really quite laughable. But I think the point here is that when you look at exactly what the organization was doing, that's really the true test of who's lying and who's not.
Mm-hmm. One last question on the trial. So we're still expecting the verdict, as I said. What's your take on this? Do you expect any sentence against the bank?
Well, I would, and I think it's very interesting that France was the only country in the world that took UBS to trial. The US covered it up, and it shows the corruption within the US Department of Justice.
Well, UBS paid more than 700 million fines in the US for what they did.
They did, but that fine was a pittance to what the profits they made. So really the taxpayers in America got cheated once again. So the point here in France, with them taking them to trial, has set a very interesting precedent, and it sends a message to other banks not to do this type of thing. So I think you're going to see a very hefty fine for the bank. I think they could lose their license, of course, but more importantly is other clients whether it's individuals, corporations, or governments, will really have to guess and choose if they want to do business with this bank again.
We'll see how it unfolds in February. I guess both parties have said they would appeal the decision, so it's not the end in February of that trial. Reading your book, you talk a lot about what you went through and what made you become a whistleblower. And I talked to a few people in Geneva about how they perceive you, and many say, well, you did something really big, historical, but they don't really see you as a genuine whistleblower, more as a born again or repentant. It's difficult to put a name on this. Certainly driven by some ethics, by some money as well. What do you tell them?
Well, I think they have to understand the timeline that was really put in place here. I started whistleblowing at UBS in 2005, and that was before the law was passed in America. So if people claim that it was for the money, that's a false statement. The second thing is that at any time in a relationship, whether it's with a spouse or with an employer, if they lie to you, do you trust them again? Most likely not. And that's exactly what UBS had done. We couldn't be trusting them because they had lied to me, my colleagues, the clients, and the shareholders. So that's where I challenged the bank to rectify the situation. And if anyone checks the record, where I went to legal and compliance, and I ultimately went to the board of directors of UBS in Zurich, and they covered it up. So I had no choice but to go to my own government and expose this.
And before doing this, you were, as you write in the book, you were enjoying being a wealthy private banker, pitching US clients. There's a nice moment in the book where we talk about the 3 zeros. If you become my client, there will be 0 income tax, 0 tax on capital gain, and 0 tax on succession. Do you think that time is over now? Bankers have moved to different type of services?
Well, I think that business model has changed dramatically, and I think it's important that it changed. Switzerland has always been seen as politically and economically stable, so I think now they're realizing that we have to compete on a level playing field with other banks and bankers around the world, and I think that's a good thing. So I think the regulatory environment has changed, and hopefully UBS has come to their senses to realize that those days are over and you can't play that game anymore.
But do you sometimes miss that very nice life you had? You had a flat in Zermatt, nice flat apparently in Geneva as well, cars. Do you miss this?
I don't miss it, no. I miss some of the camaraderie with my colleagues and some of the people that I used to associate with. But quite frankly, that was a part of my life. I did what I did, and I moved on now.
You have another fight now. You keep on fighting. That's really what makes you, that's what drives you, right?
Well, this is it. I think the scenario is so important for people to understand so it doesn't get misconstrued. People like Raoul Weil calling me a liar. I'm not a liar. I think it's important for people to say, wait a minute, this is a courageous man who did the right thing, who then sacrificed everything, my job, my reputation, my finances, and so forth. And then I think now what I'm doing is conveying that message, not just to other countries, but to individuals, students, and regulators, and law enforcement, because they need to understand exactly what happened and why this took place.
Your life has been with ups and downs. You were sentenced to 50 months of jail. You did 30. Of course, you had some ups with the 104 million US dollars that the IRS gave you as a reward, the highest reward a whistleblower ever received. I've learned from a source that the IRS is about to give you another amount of money. I have called the IRS for confirmation. They're not commenting. What do you have to say?
Well, I did receive $104 million, and that was the law, the whistleblowing law, which my attorney, Dean Zerby, wrote the law in the Congress. But with respect to future awards, I won't comment at this time.
If I may, I made some calculations. What happened since you received that reward? That was back in 2012. Since then, I tried to be very conservative. I guess it would be at least 10 other millions. Would that number is really make any sense?
Well, I think if you go onto my website, lucifersbanker.com, you'll see that the UBS clients in the Americas have paid over $10 billion in penalties, fines, and interest. So it's a staggering number, and but with respect to the awards, I'll come back on your show. Be happy.
Please be my guest anytime then.
Thank you.
The IRS doesn't comment. They also say because it's to protect the whistleblowers. It's a policy that they follow. But today, do you need your self-protection?
No, I don't feel I need protection. I think this has been going on now for a decade, and I do be very careful and cautious.
You had bodyguards at some point.
I did when I came to Paris and testified in the UBS trial with the magistrates here back in 2015. But I think it's important to understand now that people realize he's not the bad guy. He's actually done a good thing. Now, of course, there's obviously people who are going to say they don't like me and so forth. Well, there's nothing I can do about that. But no, I take my precautions, and I feel quite good about that.
Net of tax, you received a bit more million US dollars. Another source told me that about 15 million went to the lawyers, and you kept 60 million for you. Is this correct? A good approximation?
I don't talk about what I pay my attorneys. That's confidential.
It's good business for them, I assume. But I'd like to know, it's a lot of money anyway, what kind of projects you have now. And so you give talks, you wrote the book, but what really maybe other projects you have to do with this money?
Well, with respect to the money, I've invested it wisely in real estate, in artwork, private equity.
A nice car again.
Yes, and a very nice car, exactly. And I've enjoyed the fruits of my whistleblowing. And I think it's important too for people to understand that conveys to other whistleblowers, because the money does incentivize. Now, I didn't do it for the money because the law didn't exist at the time, and that's very important. But what's important is for other people to eradicate waste, fraud, and corruption, whether it's in government or in corporate life. So I think now with this windfall of money, I've been very fortunate to help other whistleblowers, help people less fortunate.
So how do you help them, to be concrete?
Well, sometimes I give them money who are desperate and who are financially strapped. And the other thing is I give them advice and help them to understand what they can do going forward in their life. And I think that's very important, because sometimes people really don't know what to do, and I've been through that.
Oh, we can elaborate a bit on this. I've talked to Nicolas Forissier. He's one of the French whistleblower. I think you haven't met, right?
I have not met him.
He's the one he was the auditor at UBS, but he still has a job in the banking industry, in the financial industry. So he's kind of still doing well. I couldn't reach in time for that interview Stéphanie Gibault, who went on a very different path. Have you been in touch with her?
I did. I met with Stéphanie Gibault quite some time ago. And the problem there is that UBS attacked her, and she was trying to do the right thing. She wasn't a banker, she was the head of marketing.
Yes.
And she did some very good things for the bank. Of course, the bank liked what she did for work until she exposed what they were doing, which was wrong. So I think, again, a whistleblower gets intimidated and harassed, and that's something that we can't have. We need the laws changed.
But have you helped her in particular?
I did. I helped her with some money. I actually met her in the United States and here in Paris.
All right.
And I tried to give her advice and information, and we shared stories, of course. And I think it was important to see the synergies between what she had experienced and what I experienced. So that's very important, and it just shows what UBS was doing all along.
Have you met other Swiss whistleblowers? There's famous Rudolf Elmer, former Julius Baer employee, Christoph Miley, also former UBS employee. Have you met them?
I haven't. I may have passed by Rudolf Elmer, but I didn't have any substantial conversation with him. The problem there is his case was much different, of course. He was working for a Swiss bank outside of Switzerland, so the details of that case were much, much different. But I think, again, there's some people that had a lot of courage to come forward. In whistleblowing, people have to understand what it takes to do that. I was a single man. I wasn't married with children, so I didn't have much to lose on the family side. So you have to take a lot of things into consideration as a whistleblower, and I think a lot of people don't understand that.
How do you structure that support? Is it just yourself, or you built a foundation, an NGO? How this is working?
Next year, we'll probably put together, myself with some other whistleblowers, an organization, maybe a foundation or an endowment that actually aids and assists whistleblowers so that we can move forward. And my attorneys and I, we wrote a letter to the EU with respect to the EU directive on whistleblowing, which is a very weak law, and it doesn't work. And I think this is where the society has to step forward and understand that helping whistleblowers helps society. it's an extension of law enforcement in essence.
Where will that endowment or foundation be based, do you know?
I'm not sure yet. We're going to look at the most optimal location and then where it will really benefit not just the whistleblowers but the organizations that they affect.
Have you met other whistleblowers? We're talking this week about Julian Assange, still in the London Ecuador embassy, maybe leaving it in the coming days. Have you met him?
I have. I've actually met him twice in the Ecuadorian embassy, and I talked to him at length there. And
what did you tell him?
well, I first asked him what he thought about what was going on in the administration, in the Obama administration, and he was very candid with respect to Hillary Clinton and having her server at home and avoiding the FOIA requests. And he was very adamant about that, and he was very sharp with respect to his details and facts. He's a very smart man, but a lot of people dislike him because he's exposing the facts once again. So we talked about his own situation, we talked about other whistleblowers, and we talked about the way in which society has changed as a result of whistleblowers. Mr. Snowden, Harry Markopoulos is a very good friend of mine.
Have you met Snowden?
Snowden I have not met, no. But I was surprised that Oliver Stone did his movie and no Hollywood studio would do the movie, so he had to do it in Munich, Germany. And I was at the premiere of that, so it was really quite astonishing.
Are you still in close touch with Julian Assange?
I'm not in close touch with him, no. But I did visit him twice in the Ecuadorian embassy.
All right. So if he leaves the embassy, will you give him some support?
Yes, I'd support him. I think I'm also going to recognize law enforcement and the laws, and hopefully they'll be followed. But I think they've put a lot of pressure on this gentleman. And again, we hope that this will work in his favor in the end, because I think if Brad Manning, who stole the information and gave it to him, got his sentence commuted by Barack Obama, why shouldn't he have his as well?
Today you live in Malta. Why is that?
Well, Malta is an English-speaking island. I love boating from my early days of growing up in the Boston area. The close proximity to Europe is very nice. The cuisine and the history. I love the history of Malta. It's quite an interesting area. So I enjoy that now, and I love to travel through Europe, so it's quite convenient.
How much tax is playing a role in your decision to be based in Malta?
Well, I'm still a U.S. citizen. I pay my taxes, and as you saw on the check, I paid a lot more taxes than most people have paid in their lifetime. So, no, I've paid my full share of taxes.
How long do you plan to live there?
I don't know, actually. I like to travel quite a bit. I have friends around the world, so I enjoy that.
Malta is also quite a controversial jurisdiction, and we've seen recently the bank Pilatus losing its license. It has some issue with its reputation. But you feel comfortable with it, living in that place?
Well, I live there. I don't do banking in Malta because it is a little bit questionable, let's say. But no, I enjoy the atmosphere there. But the banks there have had a problem, and they've had a problem because there's a lot of business that has gone unnoticed, and they accept a lot of money for the online gambling. The cryptocurrency is quite big there now. So it's been a historically difficult place to control and regulate, but I think that's changing now, and I think it's for the better.
Let's talk a bit about Switzerland. Have you been back to Switzerland recently?
I haven't been back, no.
Why is that?
No reason to go back, actually. I don't own any property there.
You've sold everything. I know you've sold the German place.
Yes, I actually, and I don't have any of my artwork there. That's all out. But I have some friends, and I visit them in Paris, in London, in Munich. So I think it's nice to travel, but I haven't been back to Switzerland, no.
Would you be afraid of being arrested in Switzerland?
I didn't break any laws in Switzerland. To the contrary, I actually got a subpoena from the United States Senate, and I followed the laws of Switzerland. I refused to give up the names of clients to the Department of Justice, and they were very angry with me. The same excuse UBS gave in the Senate as well.
I actually talked to your lawyer in Geneva, Charles Poncet, who helped you win against UBS on the Labor Relations Court. He confirms it's all fine. You can come back anytime. There's nothing. It's all time barred anyway. So you could give a speech or do something again in Switzerland.
Well, that might be something I would do with some of the media folks I know there. They're very kind. They were writing articles about me that were factual. And Charles is a very good attorney. He helped me greatly during that time, and we were successful thanks to him.
If we take a step back and you look at your life today, and if you had the opportunity to do something differently, what do you think you would do?
That's a great question. I think to change, to go out of the banking sector, which I did my entire life, is really a big deviation from that. It'd be hard to say what exactly I would do, but I'm not really a politician per se. I would say someone sort of an advocate, and I think that's important so people understand the message gets communicated effectively. And I think something along those lines would be.
So not the army, because you went to a military university and you could have become was it a pilot you wanted to become?
Yes, I wanted to become a pilot in the Air Force, and I was too tall. So it was an interesting time, military school in America, and I studied economics as well. But I think it gives a nice balance for a young gentleman to have the military component as well as the academia. And I think a lot of people today push the military down, and I think it's wrong. I think there's a place in everyone to have a little bit of military experience.
It's almost time to wrap up on this very chilly, I can tell you, morning here in Paris. Let me ask you a few kind of fire questions, if I may. In the book, I understand you're a big hockey fan. Will you buy a hockey club one day?
Well, if I had that much money, I might buy a hockey club, but I'm a big collector of original 6 memorabilia in the United States.
What's you've traveled around the world, around the globe a lot. What's your favorite place on Earth?
Oh, that's difficult to say.
Well, give me 2 then.
Okay, well, I would say the island of St. Bart's in the Caribbean, where it's a French island, beautiful spot. I lived there. My father had a home there for 20 years. And I would say in Asia as well, the Philippines and Thailand, that's 2 different places, but those are beautiful places in the world for cuisine and culture and weather.
What's your favorite newspaper?
I don't have one.
US?
No.
European?
No, don't have one.
All newspapers.
I mean, I read the Financial Times, but I wouldn't call it my favorite newspaper. But it is.
I'd like to finish with one question on the blockchain. It's the buzzword, and it has to be blockchain in one way or another. A bit what it was with the internet.com bubble back in the end of the 1990s. But blockchain is supposed to bring a lot of transparency, traceability in many different ways, including in the financial system. In your fight, are you a supporter of the blockchain? Do you know much about it, and do you see a way it could help bringing that transparency in the financial system?
I'm not an expert on blockchain and cryptocurrency, but I've actually lectured in Malta at the conference on that recently, and a lot of people enjoy my story because it dovetails with what their mission statement is transparency and accountability, and I think that's important in any sector. So I've certainly embraced it, but I am far from an expert in cryptocurrency.
Would you invest in blockchain?
I personally wouldn't, because I'm not an expert. I don't know enough about it, but I certainly support the whole concept of people having more accountability and more transparency.
And do you think, because there's a lot at stake, and that blockchain could disrupt the financial industry, and I guess many banks or large players would not like this to happen. Do you think we're still in a world where new things can come up and change the established order?
I think it will. Unfortunately, the banks are so powerful, not just money-wise, but with politicians, and I think that's a bigger problem, and that's something that has to be addressed. But I think we always embrace change, and I think cryptocurrency will do some change, and some good change. There'll be some bad times, of course, because it has to go through reforms and regulations, but I think in general, I think people like to see change.
Bradley Birkenfeld, thank you very much. Welcome back on the program anytime the IRS give you a Christmas present.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.